Hey everybody, welcome to Sama. I'm Darek Mazzone, your host. Thanks for your time. Appreciate you being here. We focus on music from all over the world. We focus on music with intention. Often it's called sacred music or music with a sense of tradition, something that kind of ties you to the earth and yet at the same time hopefully elevates you to a place where your heart and soul can fly. Today, I have the Naghash Ensemble. It's a contemporary music ensemble from Armenia featuring 3 female singers and also duduk, oud, and dhol, and piano. They perform new music written by Armenian-American composer John Hodian, who I've been talking to quite a bit. It's based on sacred texts of the medieval Armenian mystic and poet and priest Mkrtich Naghash, described as the sound of ancient Armenia reinvented for the 21st century by Armenian composer Tigran Mansourian. The Songs of Exile, which is the most recent release from John, combines earthy spirituality, Armenian folk songs, new classical music, contemporary post-minimalism, and the energy of Western rock and jazz. I am very, very pleased to have John Hodian here of the Naghash Ensemble. Hi, John.
Hi, Derek. How are you?
I'm good. We were chatting before we started recording about what's been going on in Armenia, and when I bring artists such as yourself in, I specifically want to know more about what's going on in your hood, what's going on in your your country. Now, you were born in the U.S., but you've been living in Armenia for a while. Armenia has been in the news, not for all the best reasons. Armenia is also interesting because the Kardashians, are one of the biggest pop stars in the world, and for many people, that's Armenia. And that's a little twisted because Armenia is thousands of years old with an incredibly vibrant and amazing culture on all levels. Cuisine, music, all different types of art. And so I'm not going to get into a whole post discussion on the impact of the Kardashians, but it's interesting when you say Armenia, you just put it on your search engine of choice. Armenia, Kardashians are going to come up, which is an interesting place to be when you're presenting such delicate and deep and thought-provoking music from the place. Tell me a little bit about what's been going on for you.
What's been going on for me? What's been going on for Armenia?
Oh, you're there, so it's both.
Okay, yeah. Well, there's been a lot. The past 3 years have been certainly very history-making for Armenia in all sorts of major ways. There was a major revolution here about 3 years ago. Maybe 4 years at this point. Since the fall of the Soviet Union, Armenia had been basically free, although they're still kind of a protectorate of Russia, but it was still its own country, but still kind of ruled by various people who still had that same kind of mindset, the kind of Soviet corrupt, we're in it for just ourselves and a few other people.
What's my cut?
Well, yeah, exactly. And it turns out the last guy who was here, his cut was quite large. I didn't even know that kind of money passed through Armenia, let alone ended up in his pockets. But then there was a man who named Pashinyan, who was a member of parliament, not in one of the bigger parties, and was not even taken all that seriously in some ways, was an ex-journalist, but had gotten into parliament. And he said, I'm going to walk all across Armenia. And by the time I get to Yerevan, the whole country's going to have joined me, and we're going to take back the government. And that's the kind of rhetoric you hear. You can even hear that in the United States. It's all just nonsense. Nobody takes that kind of stuff seriously. This actually happened here. And if you Google it, it's kind of amazing. Actually, it didn't get enough play. It didn't get enough notice in like the New York Times and whatnot. But
no.
This man really did this. And the entire population did join him. And the rich, the poor, the left, the right, everybody was tired of this corrupt system that had been in place for so long. And at first, the guy was not going to step down. At first, they tried to kind of squash the revolution. They started putting people in jail. The jails filled up so quickly, people would not back down. And the people were doing it very peacefully. They had this thing, they'd say, Hamatsek, which means just join us. That was their whole thing, join us. And they'd say it to the police, they'd say it to the military, and eventually everyone did. They joined them. At first, the man who was in charge said, we're going to squash this. So this is minor disturbance. We're going to put this out. Next day, he gave up. He just said, okay, it's yours. So that was a beautiful thing. And this guy Pashinyan really did start to do some serious reforms here in terms of corruption and making things more equitable. Because, again, that Soviet mindset had been so deeply ingrained here in terms of the way things were done. But then, unfortunately, we were attacked by Azerbaijan over a piece of territory called Nagorno-Karabakh, which is one of these areas that has changed hands a lot. And it was very unfortunate the way the map was drawn when it was drawn in terms of what got to be Iraq, Iran, Armenia, Azerbaijan, all these things. Yeah. This was just some, Western European diplomats making this stuff up. So there's this huge population of Armenians living in this area that they just determined was going to be Azerbaijan. So these Armenians said, no, we don't want that. We're going to be with Armenia. And they said, well, no, you can't. So there was this war 30 years ago, which was the Nagorno-Karabakh War, with basically Armenia, the country, trying to assist this group of Armenians that were technically within Azerbaijan. Well, Armenia won that war. So that land, while not officially recognized as Armenia, was now called Nagorno-Karabakh. This is probably too much inside baseball for what our purposes
No, give it to me. This is good. Okay. This is good.
All right. So for 30 years, this part of, again, called Nagorno-Karabakh, but it was basically viewed as Armenia. Armenia considered it theirs. They considered themselves part of Armenia. I used to go there all the time. I loved going there. Now, technically, as an American, I still have an American passport. I had to go through a lot of changes to go there because America didn't even recognize it as a country. But a very good friend of mine had built an art center there, a beautiful place. And we were talking about cultural capitals of different countries. In Nagorno-Karabakh, the cultural capital is this place called Shusha. And he built this art center there that was beautiful. I played at the opening of it. It was just an amazing thing, a lot of energy, a very, very poor area, but a lot of diaspora and Armenians were coming in and doing things there. Anyway, for 30 years, it was basically part of Armenia, and then Azerbaijan attacked about 2 years ago. And it was a horrible war. It was really nasty, and it didn't get a lot of notice. And a lot of countries paid some lip service, especially certain countries like France said, oh, this must stop, Azerbaijan must stop what they're doing. Kind of like everyone's saying to Russia, oh, this must stop, this is horrible what you're doing. But it was also right in the middle of COVID. And the United States had Donald Trump as president, and that didn't help. And basically, Armenia totally lost that war, and we lost a lot of the land that was Nagorno-Karabakh is now in the hands of Azerbaijan again. This is a particularly sensitive thing for Armenians because Azerbaijan is very tightly wedded to Turkey, and they view it as a pan-Turkic empire. Nothing against Turks, nothing against modern-day Turks, but historically, there are some issues there where the Turks were very, very aggressive and basically wiped out 3/4 of the population of Armenia.
Yeah, the genocide.
My grandmother was a genocide survivor, which says how old I am, but actually she was extremely old when she died. I was fairly young, I think I was 9 or 10. And I remember her, I grew up with her. So this was a very, very painful thing that happened with Azerbaijan, and it's ongoing. So right now they've blocked the access from Armenia to this thing we call it Artsakh. Most of the world knows it as Nagorno-Karabakh. So there's a lot of people there that are not able to get medicine, not able to get food. It's nasty, nasty, nasty. And it's been going on for months now. And the Americans sent people here. They sent Nancy Pelosi here. But it's like, oh, this is terrible. This has got to stop. And then they go back, and it's just over. Nothing happens. So,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry to hear that. That it's the news cycle right now is just overwhelmed with these stories, and then things just get. But there was a civil war that killed 1 million people in Congo. So it's like.
And barely registers here.
Barely registered, and things that are going on right now, and I'm dealing with this in so many different levels.
Yeah,
here,
sure.
In the context of what I'm trying to do here, it's like obviously, I use this line all the time because it's like telling somebody they're an idiot for the way they're voting isn't going to change their minds.
Yeah,
But if you present the culture, you present a music from someplace else, like we're dealing with this right now with the immigrant populations, where it's like, yes, these people are from Somalia, Eritrea, Afghanistan. They look a little different.
Yeah.
Ukrainians are, they're welcome, obviously, because of their similar culture. But if they're from a different culture, a different religion, it's so easy for people to suddenly turn them into the other. And so we go, and I'm an immigrant, so I'm like, this is ridiculous. They're just immigrants. They just have a different belief system. Let's find a way to present their music and their culture to get people to get their hearts to open up a little bit, and not be so. I mean, obviously, you sitting in the middle of Yerevan and playing Azerbaijani pop music isn't going to do anybody any good, least of all your health.
No, that would not fly.
But what can we do to kind of find ways to get people to connect with each other? And I don't want to go into too much of a little political conversation about this, because I want to talk about the ensemble, and I want to talk about the work that you've been doing, and the fact that you are tapping into something which is the core of what I'm trying to do with Sama, and even with KXP. It was like, let me find musicians and artists that are playing something that has a thread to something that is intrinsically theirs. We're living in a Western hegemony, Western pop culture hegemony. You can find Beyonce anywhere in the world, maybe outside of North Korea, definitely Cuba. So it doesn't even politically break down. So I want to elevate and highlight musicians who are actually going a little deeper and creating those sense of roots. I'm not a purist. I don't believe this music's trapped. Like, I like your work because you don't create that classical, this must be the way it was done. That's the way it was written. It must be that way. It's like, no. But you could tell the connection, and I think that's really important, because the next generation can hear that and find something of themselves in that. The story with Poland is very interesting, where under communism, when I was living there, folk music was crammed down your throat as a counter to the Western, pop music, fun. And then when communism fell, all the kids were like, screw that. I hate that folk crap. That's not real. And then, a decade later, they're like, wait, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
It was crammed down our throat, but it wasn't even real. It wasn't even the really village stuff. So so tell me why. Tell me how. Tell me what inspired you. And now you're touring. You're playing this. At KXP, we had you on Transmusicales. How did this come about? Give me your story here, because it's fast. I know it, but I want you to tell me.
Derek, it's crazy. It's certainly not premeditated. Certainly, I never would have guessed any of this happened. Basically, I really just followed my nose and just followed my intuition. Again, I grew up in America, grew up in Philadelphia and New York. Everybody else in the ensemble is local from Yerevan, Armenia. And I first came here almost 18 years ago. I first came here. And I fell in love with the country and fell in love with so many things about it, especially going to Nagorno-Karabakh and Shushi and everything. There were so many things I fell in love with, but one of the things I fell in love with, I heard this woman singing. One of the things I used to love to do when I came here was to go out into the country. There's so many ancient monasteries. Armenia takes its Christianity fairly seriously. It was one of the first nations to adopt Christianity as the official religion.
Yeah. When did that happen?
300, basically around 300. It might be 301 or something.
You guys had serious apostle stuff going on.
Yeah. And still to this day, a lot of very, very devout people. And because of that, they have these wonderful monasteries, these beautiful, beautiful things that, you couldn't build today at all. And a lot of them have incredible acoustics. And I was in one of these temples when I thought I was and this one temple dates back to pagan times. This was built before the time of Christ, actually. And I was there. I thought I was by myself, actually. And I suddenly heard this sound, this person singing. And I thought, well, are they piping this music in? Because it was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. And it turns out it was this woman who was singing this Armenian medieval spiritual music. But in this temple, the way it resonated and everything, it was so beautiful. And it was and at that time I was I had, I've always been a composer all my life. But when I was living in New York, if you don't want to be an academic and you're not interested in popular music or don't want to pursue that, and you want to sleep indoors, you want to make some kind of a living, I took to scoring films. And for a while, I did that for about 12 years straight and was fairly successful at it. Did a whole lot of television and film stuff. And when I moved to Armenia, I kind of stopped all that completely. I was kind of adrift for many years, actually. Heard this woman's voice. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Today, she is now the lead singer of the Naghash Ensemble. That day when I first heard her, I said, I'm going to write you a piece. And meanwhile, my Armenian was, even though I'm Armenian, grew up in a very Armenian household, I didn't speak much Armenian, and she didn't speak that much English. So I'm meeting her for the first time, and I'm saying, oh, God, your voice is so beautiful. I'm going to write this music for you, and we're going to tour all over the world, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. And she's like, whatever, because Armenians are also very modest, so she might not have known what was going on. Sure enough, 3 or 4 years later, I went back to her with this music I had written, with the sound of her voice in my head, combined with a lot of other things that I had always wanted to do, or things that I'd always been interested in. Mm-hmm. I've always been a counterpoint freak. I'm a total Bach freak, or even before Bach, a lot of medieval polyphonic vocal writing. Mm-hmm. My training is basically as a Western classical musician, but I grew up in this very Armenian household. All my father's record collection was totally Armenian stuff. That's all we heard. It's all we heard in church. It's all we heard in weddings, funerals. Everything was Armenian music. Mm-hmm. But again, my training is Western classical stuff. So anyway, wanting to put this ensemble together, there was a long time where I had to figure out what the texts were, and that's a whole other story, which maybe we should save. But in terms of the sound of the ensemble, I kind of knew what I wanted to do. And I ended up putting these 3 female voices together, because again, I'm always thinking contrapuntally, and it's a little, in some ways, the melodies are almost folk-like, even though they're not traditional folk melodies. They're fairly simple tonal melodies. But there's a lot going on in terms of weird harmonies and counterpoint and rhythmic, asymmetrical things bouncing off of each other. So this music ended up with all these influences, all these things that are very natural to me. Armenia has this really strong sense of tradition, and that's great. That's a beautiful thing. But if I was to do traditional Armenian music, that would not be a real thing for me. That's not what I grew up with. It's not who I am. I grew up in Philadelphia. I grew up, you're hearing a lot of sound of Philadelphia. You're hearing a lot of Motown. You're hearing a lot of Prince. You're hearing a lot of popular music. Again, big study of Western classical music, and then kind of fell under that second generation of minimalists, post-minimalists, Mm-hmm. Phil Glass produced my first record, kind of grew up with that, was a big fan of Steve Reich at the time. Mm-hmm. So you have all these things that I think come to bear in the music, and you can hear it. It's like, yeah, you hear it. Now that I say these things, if you go back and listen to it again, it's like, oh yeah, medieval polyphonic vocal music. Oh yeah, there's that minimalist thing kicking in there. There's a lot of trancey rhythmic stuff. Oh yeah, that's very funky. He's listening to Prince or something there. So there's a lot of different things. But I think if you do a synthesis of those things and it's genuine, I really hate pastiche. When you have like Oriental jazz, jazz with a little touch of this, or when things, it gets back to what, and I like to tell this story about what Stravinsky said. There's a quote attributed to him: "Bad composers borrow, good composers steal." And at first it seems like just a cute thing to say, and it makes composers seem like they're some rogues.
No, it's absolutely.
But I think what he's getting at is if you borrow something, it's not really yours, and you're never really going to integrate it fully. If you steal it, it is yours. It becomes part of your DNA. Yeah. And when it becomes yours, you can do what you want with it in a genuine way because it's you. So it's a question of how deep you go with your influences. And I think also moving here and it put me in touch with a different type of Armenian music than what I grew up with, because there's this whole Western Eastern
Yeah.
dichotomy. Here I was hearing phenomenal duduk players, every night of the week, phenomenal kamancha players, kanun players, just great musicians.
But you had this instrumentation as a palette to tap into that automatically puts you in that place, puts you in that sound. It's one thing if it's just like you're talking about, like dabbling jazz, where it's just, okay, here's this one instrumentation, but it's a pretty much, it's a quartet. But you're tapping into duduk, which is the sound of Armenia. You the dhol, and
very soulful,
and it goes, and I like the way you spoke about the resonance of the cathedral, where that person is playing, which is something that's kind of lost in us right now, because we don't really, that was like that's your first stereophonic experience, where you're like hearing God.
Yeah.
But in the work that you're putting out, it's Armenian, and I'm not going to say you're a thief, but yeah, you stole it. It's yours.
Yeah.
You're actually putting it out. You know that it's Armenian. You can tell, and it's not dabbling. You're actually going full bore into it with the whole ensemble. But I'm curious, what is it about the Mkrtich? What is it about? Am I pronouncing it? Mkrtich
Naghash.
Mkrtich Naghash. What is it about him and his work that made you want to go, I'm going to name it after him?
Yeah, sure. That's a whole story. Once I had this voice and I had kind of envisioned the sound, and music always starts for me, like an energy. It's like I can feel it. I know what it's going to be. I know what the architecture of it's going to be. I don't know the specific melodies and whatnot, but I know what the vibe of it's going to be. I knew what the vibe of this ensemble is going to be. But for a singer, you have to have text, and the texts have to mean something. They have to be the right text, and I'm really, really picky about that stuff. That's the one thing that I would say doing like 12 straight years of film scoring did for me. It's like the music has to be about something. It's always in response to something for me, usually. For me, I don't think I'll ever write a pure string quartet or piano sonata or something like that. It has to be about something. Anyway, so I had to find the text, and I read everything. And Armenia has some great writers of major historical significance, and I thought I might collaborate with a contemporary Armenian poet, and everything I read. And finally, there's this huge collection of books. Literally, each one is like this thick. It's called The Heritage of Armenian Literature. And in the middle of volume 2 was this one tiny fragment of text by this virtually unknown medieval Armenian poet and priest named Mkrtich Naghash. And he wrote this again, just this one stanza that was really beautiful about living life as an exile. The word they use in medieval Armenian is garib. It's actually a Persian word. Again, at that time, medieval Anatolia, language was all mixed up. I mean, Armenians were living with Jews, were living with Arabs, were living with Ottoman Turks, and everyone was basically kind of getting along. Yeah. And language was getting all mixed up. Musics were getting all mixed up. Anyway, so this guy wrote very beautifully about living in exile, because he himself had been forced to live in exile. The Ottoman Turks had forced him out at a certain point. So this whole concept of living in exile is major important to most Armenians, because we're scattered all over the world because of the way our homeland has gone. We talked a little bit before we started recording about what Armenia was, dates back to Urartian times, back to 900 BC, vast chunk of land, vast, huge empire that is just whittled down and whittled down and whittled down and whittled down until you get to this genocide at the hands of the Turks in the early 1900s. And now the actual landmass of Armenia is tiny. It's tiny. I have to give a talk in Michigan next week, and so I looked it up. It is literally 1/10 the size of the state of Michigan. It's just a little chunk of land, and because of that, Armenians are spread out all over the world. It's actually fascinating. I think 13 million or 14 million Jews in the world. And you think of, Jewish population is huge and so important, and they are, of course. Well, there's 11 million Armenians. It's not that many fewer. It's just
No.
But I think because they're so scattered, some ended up in Lebanon, some ended up in Iran, some ended up in Europe, some made it to America. Certain areas, Los Angeles, Boston, Detroit, Philadelphia, these became kind of major Armenian strongholds. I happen to grow up outside of Philadelphia. And again, a very tight-knit Armenian family. I don't think I'm answering whatever question you asked.
No. You're giving me this sense. I mean, fundamentally, I think the reason why you're doing this is that it connects you to your heritage in a way that you're actually giving something back to it. Like you're a composer, so you need to take and give back.
Well, you had asked about the text. I talked about finding this little quatrain of text by Mkrtich Naghash. So I did a lot of digging, and I found out this guy was at the time kind of a big deal as both a poet and a priest. But again, he was forced into exile, and all he left behind were these 15 poems. Turns out all 15 of them are just amazing. They're beautiful, and they're in perfect rhyming quatrains. And the language is what they call Middle Armenian. There's like an ancient form of Armenian, and then there's a modern Armenian. This Middle Armenian, you could maybe almost compare it to like a Shakespearean English, but maybe even less intelligible to a modern Armenian. A lot of borrowed words from Persian and Arabic and whatnot. But the musicality of the language was just amazing. It turns out, after I talked to several people who were major Armenian scholars, there's certain little hotbeds of this stuff, guys who know this stuff, that they, as best as they can tell, the language was meant to be performed. These poems were meant to be performed. They were sung, they were chanted. It was a performance art. Poetry was a performance art at that time. And it was one of the major ways of getting information across. Certainly one of the major ways of spreading your religion, whether you were a Muslim or a Christian or whatever. Rumi, the same time as Rumi. These great writers of that time period. Armenia had a couple of them as well. And this guy Nagash just was, I think, one of the best, and he wrote very beautiful. Again, the language was very beautiful. And in some ways, all I would do is just sit and listen to I always have a native Armenian recited for me. So I know the natural prosody of the medieval Armenian. And I would just, do what came to me. I'm not thinking, oh, I want this to sound Armenian, or I want this to sound, minimal, or anything like, oh, this is jazzy. I don't think at all of that. I don't think of anything. I just put stuff down on the page, just blacken the page with notes and hope for the best. It's usually not the best. And then I start rewriting, and then I rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. And it takes me in some ways I'm really fast, and in some ways I'm really slow, because it's all about rewriting and refining.
Tell me about how the band came together. How did you find them, and how did their influence on this music affect the way the band came about?
Yeah, well, there's a couple interesting. Again, this voice that I heard, Hasmik Baghdasaryan, to this day is still our lead soprano. All the original members are still part of the band, except for one. I lost my duduk player because he moved to Los Angeles. We're going to see him in a couple of days, actually. Okay. But I have another really great duduk player instead. But it's always been the same band. And actually, there's a couple of great things about that, because coming to Armenia, again, Armenia is a very small country. I'm this composer from New York, right? If you do something in America, you write a cello sonata, right? And you go, all right, who's the best cellist in the country? I don't know. Yo-Yo Ma. Oh, all right, what's his number? I'll call him up. And that's what you do here. I said, who's the best duduk player in town? Oh, this guy, Mkrtich Naghash. What's his number? I call him. Okay, I'll be right over. And so I was able to get, just the best duduk player, the best oud player, the best dhol player. And what they bring to the music is another level of stuff entirely. Because again, What's unique about this group is that, and it is very unique, because most people are either folk musicians, and they can do folk songs and play weddings and do all that sort of stuff, or they're conservatory people. It's not that often that you have duduk players that study at the conservatory, or oud players, or dhol players who go to a conservatory. But these guys did. So they have this very, very deep knowledge of Armenian spiritual and folk music, but also they can read anything I put in front of them. And our thing is largely written out. There's room for solos, and my dhol player especially, he always is just improvising along guidelines that I kind of loosely put out for him, but he's just a rhythmic genius. So what they bring to the music is, unbelievable. There's all sorts of stuff a composer can put on a page, everywhere from Bach, who put nothing but the notes. You don't even know what tempo really, and there's no markings at all until you get to composers like Mahler, who have like everything, like a staccato with a legato and this, and then even verbal descriptions. Oh, play this as if it's coming from the other side of a mountain or whatever. They're putting so much stuff on the page. But I tend to put basically just the notes and basic articulations and tempi and whatnot, because what they bring to it is what's important. And that's something I couldn't have gotten in the West.
Okay. Tell me, as an Armenian, as somebody who is has a connection to your country. There's a lot. Everybody's an immigrant. Some, like you and I, really close to it. Others are like, oh yeah, maybe like my wife's family came in 1630 to North Carolina. It's like, yeah, English, Welsh, Scottish, stuff like that. Yeah. But it's different for us because there's still this sense of I am from someplace else.
Yeah.
So I don't want to go into too much about the immigrant experience, but I do want to go to the experience of you as an artist. What is this offering to the story of Armenia, Armenian immigrants? How is this carry on the tale?
Well, I got to tell you, when I first started doing this stuff, I didn't know what it was. And you got to, I've always been very pragmatic as a composer, again, because I choose to sleep indoors. Like I said, you need to make a living somehow, even if it's a modest one. So if I wasn't doing film and television stuff, I was touring, and I had an ensemble before this called Epiphany Project, another thing before that called the Dharma Bums, which we won't get into. But this thing, I just, I had to start touring with it because that's what I do, mostly touring in Europe. So you have to decide, well, what is it? Where are you going to play? Well, with what this was, I wasn't going to play in a bar. We're not going to play in clubs. We're not going to play in, techno raves or something like that. So most of our playing is in classical venues and a lot of world music festivals, but also mostly classical venues that want to do something kind of outside the box. But it's also does get labeled as world music, so it's viewed as Armenian music. Well, is it? I grew up as an Armenian, but again, most of my training is Western classical. Most of the stuff I heard was stuff, aside from what I heard in the home, was like a lot of popular music and whatnot. And so when I was putting this stuff together, in the very, very beginning, there's a man you might know. Do you know Darek Mazzone?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's one of he's an older guy now, and he's in his 80s, but he's a lovely, lovely gentleman and a great, great hero to the Armenian people. And his music's gotten out there through Manfred Eicher, through his records on ECM and whatnot. There's a lot of beautiful stuff. So I got to know Mazzone a little bit, although he doesn't speak any English, but he's a real gentleman. And so I kind of gave him a very early recording of this stuff. I didn't know what he was going to say at all. So I gave it to him. Next day, I get a call from his assistant. And his assistant has this very kind of, at the time, his assistant, a very straightforward kind of Soviet style of like, Mr. Mazzone wants to see you today. Okay. At 3 o'clock at Parisian Cafe. Okay. Boom. I'm like, oh, fuck. What did I? I'm thinking like I'm in trouble. I offended him or something, or the Armenian people, or I did something wrong. And the whole way I'm there, I'm thinking, oh, well, I'm going to say I'm sorry, and I'm going to leave the country. All will be. I really didn't know, man.
Get your papers together.
Yeah. So I go there, and he gets up, and again, he's a real gentleman. He takes the CD out of his coat pocket, thinks he needs to give it back to me because it's just a loan to him. He put his arm on my shoulder, and he said, "This is like the sound of ancient Armenia, reinvented for the future." And that's where we got that. And we use that. We use that as our kind of quote.
Absolutely.
But it was so validating for me because here's this major historical figure in Armenian music saying, this is Armenian as shit. This goes back to the deep Armenian stuff. And then, that was a very beautiful thing. Then we did our very first concert in Yerevan, and it's funny, the people who come out to these things, but this old Armenian lady came up to me after the concert, and she goes, "Oh, it's so wonderful that you're keeping the old traditional songs alive." There's not a traditional song in any of this stuff. Mm-hmm. There's no traditional folk music or anything like that, but it does somehow sound Armenian. If you break it down, you can look at it's more modal than tonal. There's a lot of asymmetrical time signatures. There's a lot of 5/8, 7/8, and weird divisions of the bar line and whatnot. And it has this kind of rhythmic stuff that is just kind of Armenian sounding. But it wasn't a conscious thing. But it is somehow, I've accepted it as Armenian. If it was Armenian enough for Tigran Mansourian and for that little old lady, then it's Armenian enough for me. And yet it is of all these other things as well.
That's why I brought up, what does it offer the story? Not the story of just two Armenians in Armenia that are living in that particular life, but we just talked about 11 million Armenians all over the world. They have a very different experience. They're connected to that, because nothing like a tragedy to get people together. I grew up in Poland. Everywhere you go, there's a bullet hole. But that artists that are creating something that is for the diaspora. Yeah. And how does that connect you? Because I have two kids. They're half Polish. They listen to Polish music. They're intrigued. They this is my roots. They're teenagers, and when they talk about they're in their classrooms, where are you from? Obviously you remember being that age where you're like, who are you? What are you? Yeah. There's this connection, and I use music as a way to get them to think about where they are. And now you created something that is tied to the old, but it's new. Yeah. It's a new sound.
Armenians had this. What's that?
Or am I off base?
No, I love what you're. It's good. Okay. Armenians do have this really strong sense of tradition. It's real heavy, tradition. And it's like what you were saying. When you have a society that's been completely decimated, completely blown apart, people scattered all over the earth, whittled down to almost nothing. It's like I know it as a Bob Dylan song, but he did it from his Born Again period. It's actually a Bible quote. The song is "Strengthen the things that remain." You take the things that you have, the left in the culture, the art, the language, the poetry, the music. Those become the things you hold on to, because you don't have any land, you don't have any family. They've all been wiped out. You just hold on to the things that remain. So tradition is a very strong thing for Armenians. But I always look at it, if you look at any kind of major traditional figure in any field, take Western classical music, take Beethoven, take Bach. You can't think of two more traditional classical, that is the backbone of Western classical music. Well, those two guys in particular just blew up the map of Western classical music. What Beethoven did in terms of changing symphonic form and weird stuff with the meter and the way he would reinvent melodies and turn things in on themselves, or Bach, this you're talking revolutionary stuff. Most major figures who are these great people of tradition, the bedrocks of tradition, are guys who were just actually blowing stuff up in their day and recreating it in a lot of ways. So it is traditional, but I'm in the tradition of blowing stuff up.
Yeah,
up
no,
to
it's
it.
good. This is why this is one of the reasons we're talking right now. It's like I listened to it and I was like, okay, this is a new iteration, and I'm really curious about that because, as I said in my preface, it needs to have a connection, some kind of connection, and work from that. But where it goes is really interesting. And it's my show. I get to be the arbiter. It's like, okay, I think this. You must imagine how many records I get sent to me every hour.
I don't know. What did you listen to of ours? I'm just curious.
I listened to the whole concert that you sent me.
Oh, the live thing.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay, because I think as a live band, I mean, I love the studio recordings too, because he gets to do a lot of stuff and make everything perfect and all that. But I think live, it's something, and that's why I'm really thrilled we're doing this whole tour of America. I mean, we've been touring in Europe a lot, but we've never been to America before, and I'm thrilled.
I'm bummed that you can't come up here. I don't know how.
Well, I hope to do it again, although I got to tell you, I'm not 100% sure. It's not easy, man. Getting visas for 8 Armenians, not easy. Up until a week ago, we leave tomorrow, literally, and up until a week ago, we did not have the visas yet.
What's the closest to Seattle where you're going to be?
San Francisco, outside of San Francisco, near San Jose, basically, at a thing called Mountain View Performing Arts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
When is that?
That is March 4th. Probably be easier to fly to Los Angeles, and that's actually a beautiful theater at UCLA. If you wanted to come down, it's sold out, but I'll get you in.
Okay. That would be interesting. That would be interesting. It's
actually
tough.
Flights from Seattle to LA are nothing, and its school's pretty close to LAX. So.
Okay, that is true. That is true. I was just there actually for. We're doing a show. I'm not going to go into all my paper detail. Okay, so you sent me an email about a soprano. What's the possibility with that? What is the?
What do you mean the possibility with that?
You sent me that you have a soprano with you there? No.
No. Oh, I'm sorry. I sent you another email recently saying her mother is ill and she could not be here tonight.
Okay.
And again, because she's leaving tomorrow, she had to go out of town to be with her mom.
Okay, totally got it. I thought
wasn't going to get in the way of that.
Okay. No,
that
never.
Woman, yeah, that was the woman who I first heard. That was the inspiration for the ensemble.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's do this. We're now cut. We're going to introduce. You're going to give me some music, a performance, something. And do you know what that is? Because I want us to talk about it and introduce it.
I don't. I've been thinking about. Do you want it to be? We're not recording now, right? Officially.
No, we're recording, but I'll edit it. When I say cut, I'm going to edit it.
Okay, good. I don't know whether it has to be something that nobody else has seen yet.
No, it just needs to be white labeled, so it's not muted when we put it out. So basically, that means that whoever owns it, whatever YouTube channel, because we mostly has the original. If it's yours,
no, nothing is owned. I've never done and never will really do a deal with. I mean, unless it's some major deal, but that's not going to happen. But for us, it doesn't make sense to do a deal with a small record label.
Okay.
Because we tour a lot, so we hold on. I hold on to everything.
Okay, that's fine.
Great.
But
so anything
actual,
I give you is totally. You can do whatever you want with it.
Okay, that's perfect. So just the video itself. Just need that. It could be, usually it could be a couple of songs, 3 songs. We're not tied to.
Great.
And then so it's like something that we can actually, I'll introduce it. I'll play a couple of songs. We'll have a conversation, and then we'll close with that one song, and then I'll say thank you. So
and
right
it will
now,
be a real live gig, not a studio gig. Great.
What do you mean studio gig? Not live gig?
It's a live show. It's a videotaping of a live concert.
Yeah, that's great.
Great.
That's great. I mean, fundamentally, this whole thing is like an EPK. Like, I started doing this. What can I do to help these artists? Okay, everybody's on video. I have a following. Let me put this out. And then, in theory, when they start touring, they can point to that. I mean, that's KXP's bread and butter. Has been forever. It's like, and now, but this is my solo project where I can go deeper. KXP's still a little poppy. It's my band. I love it, but it's I want to go deeper in this.
Speaking of a little poppy, I mean, we did the KXP thing for Transmusical.
Mm-hmm.
And just when we got hired for that, we had played at, I think, like the Ren Opera House. And this guy saw us, the guy who runs Transmusical.
Yeah.
And he calls our manager up and says, "Oh, I want to have Naghash Ensemble at Transmusical." It's like, okay, great. And it's all right, whatever. I don't know Transmusical. I look it up and it's like, what? I mean, it's like all DJs and hip hop and really like cutting edge alternative stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And we're this like pretty much acoustic, although we like to play amplified. We like to have a lot of impact. It's an acoustic band. And yeah, it's in that category of world music, but so many times when a lot of world music festivals, they want like something very, funky. They want it to be something you could dance
Jammy,
to outdoors
usually.
or whatnot.
But that's less and less now.
What's that?
That's less and less now. They're actually going deeper.
Yeah. But anyway, this wasn't even a world music festival. This was like an alternative electronic and everything festival. And it takes place in an airport hangar. I mean, it's like in a really massive thing for like 10,000 people. They said, "Oh, and you will be the headliners. You'll be the big thing." It's like, really? And he said, yeah, we're going to bring in a Steinway D. I'm going to bring in a special sound team for you. Sure enough, he did all that. And it was amazing. I mean, it was like dead quiet. It was like an airplane hangar full of about 5,000 people, all probably drunk and stoned. But you could hear a pin drop. And
that's magic.
It was something. Yeah.
I mean, when KXP goes there, they tell us what they're going to bring us. So it's not like KXP's digging in and going like, "What can you find? I want this and this and this." So he's a truffle pig in the best possible way. He finds really great stuff. Yeah. And then we were just in Transmusicalis, and there's a reaction to the world. There's a lot of Congolese bands and Ugandan bands, and these interesting hybrids where the 21st century music of Africa is manifesting, and this is 21st century music of Armenia with the tie to its past. I totally understand why he would bring you in, and I totally understand why it was successful. So this is an interesting thing for you, and I'm acting now as like your friend, even though we haven't met, and it's almost like somebody that's in the industry. Record everything that you're doing right now. Get it in your writer. Get some people to film it. Because this could grow. This could, you've got a built-in population that cares about this, the Armenian diaspora. They'll show up. Because if they don't show up when they're having dinner, somebody says, "I saw this," everybody else at the dinner is going to be like, "I should have been there. What was wrong?" It's like a level of how Armenian really are you?
Although I gotta say, I'm amazed at the way our touring has grown in like the last 8 or 9 years that we've been touring. It's really been exponential, but it's not really aimed at the Armenian community. I mean, there's always a certain number of Armenians that come out.
You don't need to do that.
But it's only like 5% is Armenian.
You don't need to. They'll spread it out. It's the same with the South Asian community. We've got Amjad Ali Khan coming in just a little bit, and there's a significant South Asian community here because of the tech industry. It's huge. You could have a washed up Bollywood star, and there's a line down multiple blocks, and it still can be a little hard to get the classical to show up. But they will, because it's a point of pride, and so they'll come. Like we had Niaz, and there was a significant Persian population.
Oh yeah, I saw them not that long ago. I was in New York, and I saw them at what was it, La Poisson Rouge.
Yeah. So there's something there, but if you need to film everything, and you need to put it out on a regular basis, and you need to bring somebody on that will be.
Yeah, you're right. We don't really have that. We don't really have somebody doing a lot of regular videos.
You don't have to do. I mean, it's a nice thing to do. As an internship. Pay people something. But if not, you can find somebody in the Philippines or Bangladesh to basically manage that. You just upload that. But it's cool if it was somebody from Yerevan, somebody that actually has a connection with that, and to make that work. Okay, tell me about this performance that we're about to see.
This was done a little while ago in Ghent. Ghent's another one of those cities like we were talking about, like Katowice, that's become this like the major artistic hub, even though it's not the biggest city. So the performance in Ghent from about a year or two ago, and actually at that time there were a handful of new pieces that we were doing for not the very first time, but early on. a lot of this poetry of Nagash, this medieval poet Nagash, a lot of it's heavy because his life was heavy. And he was writing about things, he was writing about war, he was writing about plague, at the time. That was the original, well, not the original, but a major time of plague. I mean, now it sounds like war and plague is what we're still living through. And that's kind of what makes this stuff so relevant, and people living in exile. Anyway, I think you're going to see a piece called Lamentations on the Death of a Youth, which is, at that time when Nagash wrote it, was sometimes chanted or performed at funerals of children. But it was written because his own son had died in a battle. So it's this like really powerful, poignant text. And it's kind of one of my favorite pieces to play. I mean, it sounds crazy when you say like, oh, it's my favorite piece to play when it's such a
moves you. It moves you.
Yeah,
I get it.
That's the thing. I mean, sad songs are always the best ones, So who needs happy stuff?
That's so true.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for offering this. Thank you for the work. Have massive success on your tour. I hope that one day, inshallah, we'll get you to play in the Pacific Northwest. We have many beautiful stages here that would really, really appreciate that, and a pretty significant population that would really love to hear it.
We'd love to come.
Good luck. Stay safe. Stay sane, and be well. And don't get COVID.
Thank you, Darek. Same to you on all fronts. Keep up the good work, man.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Մեզ բարկացավ քաղցր բնություն աստվածային մեզ դառնացավ սուրա արեղը այսօր հերքեր հարածեցավ ուրա իդանեն աստվածային բորբոքեցավ ուրան իդանեն Yes, Սարսափին հարաչեն գործողան չարիած չարիածը դոփալով մատնեցին հարուին տանջանած
Hey everybody, thank you for watching Sama, Seattle Sacred Music and Art. Thank you for listening to my radio show on KEXP and watching our YouTube channel. I'm super focused on celebrating, elevating, and presenting artists from all over the world, immigrant artists, indigenous artists, artists that don't have an opportunity to be seen or heard in the noise that is often Western culture. If you like what you see, if you like what you hear, please like, subscribe, and share so we can use these platforms to continue doing this great work. Be well, and thanks for watching.